It's funny how companies will tell you that AI is not trained from stolen work, which is bad enough when they are literally taking people's work without consent and then allowing AI, generative AI in particular, to output slop that is an amalgam of other people's stolen work. But then they'll go ahead and literally take stuff that was stolen and then use that to train AI. According to a recent lawsuit, apparently companies like Nvidia are training AI on pirated material. So yeah, this is insane levels of hypocrisy on the part of companies who will tell you piracy is bad and never do it. So this is a story that spans multiple years from 2024 to more recently in 2026. So let's start with what happened back in March 11th of 2024 as reported here by Torrent Freak. The headline read, authors sue Nvidia for training AI on pirated books, specifically referring to a data set called Books 3 that not only Nvidia used to train its AI, but also other tech companies like Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI. And the reason Books 3 is controversial as a data set is because it was created from pirated material. As described here by Torrent Freak, it was created by AI researcher Sean Presser in 2020, who scraped the library of pirate site Bibliothèque. The dataset was broadly shared online and added to other databases, including the Pile, an AI training dataset compiled by Eleuther AI. Here's an exact quote from the lawsuit on the part of authors against Nvidia that reads as follows. Nvidia has admitted training its Nemo Megatron models on a copy of the Pile dataset, which includes the Books 3 dataset, which was created from a pirated archive. Therefore, Nvidia necessarily also trained its Nemo Megatron models on a copy of Books 3 because Books 3 is part of the Pile. Certain books written by the plaintiffs are part of Books 3, including the infringed works, and thus Nvidia necessarily trained its Nemo Megatron models on one or more copies of the infringed works, thereby directly infringing the copyright of the plaintiff. Then fast forward a few months to August of 2024, and Nvidia would respond, as reported here by Torrent Freak in this article whose headline reads, Nvidia says that copyrighted books are just statistical correlations to our AI models, and therefore what Nvidia is claiming is that the way they're using archives of books, even if they're pirated, is fair use because they're not using that data to present copyrighted material, but rather using that data to train AI that technically produces transformative and new work based on people's prompts. That's the argument that Nvidia is making. As the article states right here, Nvidia believes that the use of copyrighted data for AI training is a prime example of fair use, especially when the output of the model doesn't reproduce copyrighted works. And indeed, usually with AI, there's safeguards put in place so that if you say, type in like, give me the entirety of the first chapter of a book, it will straight up tell you that's copyrighted material, and so they won't present that material. But at the same time, AI companies training their AI technology using other people's works when those people don't agree with the way AI is being used as a technology, especially where Gen AI is concerned, raising questions as to whether companies have a right to do this, to essentially train their technology, this profitable product, off of other people's work who haven't given their permission, whether that's morally correct. And that's something that a lot of people are bringing up to legislators. People believe that companies should ask for permission before they feel inclined to just take someone else's work and use it to train their own technology that will be a profitable venture for them. So that alone already feels nefarious enough to a lot of people, but the fact that people are starting to learn that these companies are going out of their way to look at databases who acquired people's work, not only without their consent, but in like illicit ways, like that could actually spell legal trouble for companies like Nvidia, who still ultimately have to follow the law. And if they did ultimately end up like downloading what would be essentially pirated stuff and engaged in piracy, technically they are breaking the law. Now, Nvidia, for this particular scenario, tried to claim that because AI doesn't read books the way humans do, technically none of this really counts as piracy because you're training a computer and computers aren't humans. They believe that AI companies should be allowed to use copyrighted books to train their AI models, as these books are made up of uncopyrightable facts and ideas that are already in the public domain. And in terms of their argument against the fact that they used essentially pirated works, the way Nvidia tried to defend themselves against this is that while typically pirated copies leads to liability as a direct infringer, AI models don't see these works that way in the way that humans do. AI training doesn't involve any book reading skills or even a basic understanding of a storyline. Instead, it simply measures statistical correlations and adds these to the model. They insist that AI doesn't reproduce any of the works that it's taking from, but rather simply takes the facts and ideas in the books and transforms their original purpose to build a complex AI model that qualifies as fair use, they state. Nvidia makes this argument that to accept the plaintiff's argument would mean that an author could copyright the rules of grammar or basic facts about the world that has never been the law for good reason. Nvidia says that all of this is similar to another court case, Authors Guild versus Google. This was a case involving Google essentially trying to scan and digitize books en masse in order to make books much more searchable on Google. And the end result is what we know as Google Books today. But the thing is, there's a difference. From what I understand, Google did manually acquire the works, all the books that they, scanned or digitized in order to be able to make Google and the searching of books aspect more efficient. They didn't have this pirated archive that they downloaded from that they use in order to pursue this endeavor. From what I understand, Google actually legally acquired all of the books that contributed to making Google Books. And then the ultimate result from that was making it so that Google is more efficient at finding the source books that people might search for, that people might quote. And so it only made the original source work more discoverable. Whereas what Nvidia and AI companies are doing is not only not at all beneficial to the source material and to the source's authors, because it's not about making other people's works more discoverable. It's about training a specific technology that is meant to stand on its own as a product that can only exist if they take other people's information and works and put them into the data as an amalgam. And if these lawsuits are to be believed, and I'd say they are based on the fact that by NVIDIA's own admission, they did use the Books 3 dataset that is essentially an archive of pirated books, or at the very least, NVIDIA did not deny that they did in fact use Books 3 dataset. What all of this means is that regardless of the legalities behind whether training AI counts as fair use of material, the way NVIDIA acquired that material, the way NVIDIA acquired all of these books and all of these works, that is, at the very least, seemingly a very clear-cut, illicit aspect of NVIDIA's operation, where they straight up pirated works before training their AI. They obtained this material through a legally illicit archive, and in downloading that archive, they engaged in what is legally known as piracy. The thing is, the law has yet to catch up when it comes to drawing lines for how much companies are allowed to take other people's work without their permission, whether that stuff's fair use or whether that's stealing other people's work to create your own product for your own benefit, for your own essentially profiting. But when it comes to the laws of piracy, it's very clear cut that if you download archives of works that are put up on the internet for free without the consent of the original authors and you download that archive, that technically does count as piracy. Now, why do I bring up something from 2024? Because, well, this is a court case that is still ongoing and we recently got some new updates. This court case actually, a development worth noting is that both the authors and NVIDIA filed a joint case management statement at a California court where they basically said that they need time to gather evidence. So the authors expect that the parties need until October next year to gather facts and evidence during the discovery phase. An eventual jury trial is penciled in a full year later, November of 2026. So we haven't even gotten to that point yet, since right now it's January of 2026. So all of this is still ongoing. And we recently got some updates on that front from just yesterday, January 22nd, 2025, when Torrent Freak provided the following update via this article, whose headline reads, NVIDIA contacted Anna's archive to secure access to millions of pirated books, is what the plaintiffs claimed. Anna's archive is essentially a pirating group whose aim is to archive media across the globe. Not only do they have a vast archive of books, but recently, on December of 2025, it was reported that Anna's archive recently managed to scrape Spotify's 300 terabyte library. They posted free torrents for downloading 86,000 tracks, and an investigation was underway as music and metadata hit torrent sites. So yeah, by the law, they're essentially seen as a criminal organization, and NVIDIA, according to this lawsuit, basically directly engaged with them to try to negotiate a deal where they would pay this Anna's archive group and they would in turn receive all of that data, with the intention being to use all of that data to train their artificial intelligence. Again, it's shady enough that companies are training AI without the permission of authors and artists who don't want their work to be used to train AI. But the fact that their means of acquiring all of that data wasn't even legitimate, the fact that they use pirating as a means to train their AI puts them legally in a very precarious position if all of this is true. Here's what Torrent Freaks reports in its article. Last Friday, the authors filed an amended complaint that significantly expands the scope of the lawsuit. In addition to adding more books, authors, and AI models, it also includes broader shadow library claims and allegations, with one of the authors who is part of the lawsuit against Nvidia citing various internal Nvidia emails and documents suggesting that the company willingly downloaded millions of copyrighted books. And that's important to note because when it comes to illicitly obtained data and media, just downloading it can be criminal. Just downloading pirated stuff can count as piracy. Here's an exact quote from this lawsuit, from this complaint, that is very much worth highlighting. It reads right here: "Desperate for books, Nvidia contacted Anna's Archive, the largest and most brazen of the remaining shadow libraries, about acquiring its millions of pirated materials and including Anna's Archive in pre-training data for our LLMs." That's a quote from Nvidia's contact with Anna's Archive. Because Anna's Archive charged tens of thousands of dollars for high-speed access to its pirated collections, Nvidia sought to find out what high-speed access to the data would look like. And right here, apparently, is part of the message and part of the exchange that Nvidia had with Anna's Archive. It reads, "I am on the data strategy team at Nvidia," reads this message that went out to Anna's Archive. "We're exploring including Anna's Archive in pre-training data for our LLMs. We're figuring out internally whether we're willing to accept the risk of using this data, but would like to speak with your team to get a better understanding of LLM-related work you have done." Torrent Freak then adds further context on how this exchange went about, with Anna's Archive responding and warning Nvidia that its library was illegally acquired and maintained by Anna's Archive own admission. And Anna's Archive basically was like, "Are you sure about this?" asking Nvidia executives if they had internal permission to move forward. Apparently, Nvidia's executives granted permission within a week, after which Anna's Archive provided the chip giant with access to its pirated books. And so what the complaint tries to present is that regardless of Nvidia's argument about what's fair use and what isn't, the way they acquired the books, the archive of books, the data set, that within itself was illicit because what they ultimately did was pirate by downloading this pirated, archive and data set of books. It reads right here: "Within a week of contacting Anna's Archive and days after being warned by Anna's Archive of the illegal nature of their collections, Nvidia management gave the green light to proceed with the piracy. Anna's Archive offered Nvidia millions of pirated, copyrighted books." We're talking about so much data that what Anna's Archive promised to Nvidia was 500 terabytes worth of data, which is insane. And what makes this especially cut and dry, assuming the information in this lawsuit are true, is that there was money exchanged. This was a transaction. While this article states that the complaint does not explicitly mention whether Nvidia ended up paying Anna's Archive for access to the data, the lawsuit does say that Nvidia wanted to find out what high-speed access to the data would look like. High-speed access that Anna's Archive does charge money for. And then this lawsuit claims that Nvidia did eventually come to some kind of arrangement where Anna's Archive did provide all of the illegally obtained data, where Nvidia's management did give the green light to proceed with the piracy, with Anna's Archive offering Nvidia millions of pirated, copyrighted books. And if that is indeed what happened, then there is a strong likelihood that money was in fact exchanged. There is this tweet right here that highlights that they attempted to reach out to Anna's Archive as essentially a fake entity that wants to acquire their data, and what they got from Anna's Archive were monetary figures on what they're charging in order for them to give out all of this data in bulk. So this tweet from Ed Newton Rex reads as follows: "A few months ago, I was curious to know how much Anna's Archive was charging AI developers for access to their massive library of pirated works for training. So I emailed them saying I was interested in buying access. Here's a reply. They are charging $200,000, payable via crypto, of course. You get high-speed access to the full collection. This includes more than 60 million books. This is also the group that recently stole Spotify's entire music catalog, so expect this to be available to high rollers too. This is the collection Nvidia is accused of accessing for training. Training on pirated work is rife in the AI industry. It's been embraced by some of the biggest AI companies in the greed field race to win the AI market. And yet again, companies will tell you that, oh no, AI does not steal other people's work. We use them fairly. When you're going to entities who, by the definition of the law, are essentially stealing digital media and making it accessible for free to people so that they don't have to pay money for it. Like at that point, you are literally, like objectively, training AI off of literal stolen work. So yeah, this statement concludes with, when they claim what they're doing is somehow fair, remember that not only is it theft, which is bad enough, it supports further theft by funding pirates. And that's the thing. Nvidia is ultimately helping fund this organization that many perceive as being entities who have lost, a lot of companies a lot of money because of the fact that they hosted so much media for free for people to download. If all of this is true, then Nvidia will have effectively funded piracy, will have funded illegally illicit activity. This statement finishes with, we desperately need a hard reset in the AI industry and must turn away from theft and start paying the people whose work it relies on. And so yeah, while the complaint doesn't explicitly state that Nvidia paid Anna's archive to provide them, hundreds of terabytes worth of data that they can then use to train AI, that does seem like the likely scenario based on the fact that when people contact Anna's archive about getting all of that data, Anna's archive does present a price point. And then there's an additional layer on top of all of this that the author suing Nvidia present in this complaint. Going back to the whole situation surrounding the Pile, which has the Books 3 pirated data set, not only do they claim that Nvidia made full use of the Pile, but they also helped distribute the Pile. Or as it reads right here, Nvidia distributed scripts and tools that allowed its corporate customers to automatically download the Pile. So they not only potentially engaged in piracy, but they also facilitated their corporate customers also engaging in the same piracy. And in doing so, it is alleged that Nvidia generated revenue from customers by facilitating access to these pirated data sets. And if all this somehow did lead to Nvidia directly profiting and getting revenue from essentially distributing piracy, that's even a worse look in the eyes of the law. So yeah, this is still all ongoing, but basically what authors want is for AI companies to stop pulling this shit, using pirated work to train AI, literally stolen work by the letter of the law, and are also requesting that companies like Nvidia compensate these authors for damages that were suffered. So yeah, this is something that has spread far and wide across the internet, and a lot of people have plenty of takes on this and are speaking to the kind of hypocrisy of corporations who wag their fingers at you about piracy, but then when it benefits them, when it benefits these multi-billion-dollar corporations, they're more than happy to engage with it. So this individual right here quote tweeted this report and said, piracy is totally fine when you're the world's largest company wanting to use it to make even more money, but not when you're broke and can't afford to access art you need to make your life better. Now, Nvidia is not the world's largest company, but they are a major mega corporation who are all in on this AI race. And if all these accusations are true, if all this data is true, then it seems as though they will engage in this race at all costs, even if it means doing illegal shit like literally doing piracy, downloading archives of pirated works. And so I'll be very curious to see how all this plays out. And I'll also be very curious to see how the law interprets Nvidia's defense of, well, technically, we're not taking someone else's work and then just presenting that and making that our product. We're just using the data of the works that we're taking to train our AI, and that form of use is technically fair use. I wonder whether the current state of the law favors that argument or if it's an argument that falls apart, and whether legislators feel the need to update the law so that companies like Nvidia don't get away with such arguments, because at the end of the day, there are legitimate concerns about just how powerful AI is as a tool, which can, at times be used for good, but also at times be exploited and abused in ways that, creators of works who are without consent, being essentially having their work contribute to the training of AI, these are people who don't want AI to be used that way. And whether laws will allow those people to opt out of such training, and whether the law will see these works as protected from the training of AI, which is something that has become such a major concern and a major topic of conversation. All of that only time will tell. But right now, this is what's going on right now with Nvidia. And while when it comes to AI, the law is murky and gray and not fully defined and still catching up, when it comes to the act of piracy, like that's been established. And if what these reports are saying is true, if what the lawsuit is presenting is true, with Nvidia not denying some of these claims, then Nvidia full on engaged in piracy to train AI. And if that is true, then Nvidia would have broken the law. And I'd be very curious to see if that will lead to some significant consequences, though, corporations usually tend to get away with a lot. But yeah, this is kind of what you need to know. And in the meantime, I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole, Nvidia pirating situation. Do you think Nvidia is in the right in what they did? Are they legally safe? Or do you think Nvidia legally fucked up and were not in the right to use things like Anna's archive? And, what do you think about their argument that what they've done is just use other people's work as fair use, or, in a way that falls under the fair use doctrine? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young Out.